This video is sponsored by Shortboxed, the easiest and safest way to buy and sell graded comic books. Download the app today using the link in the description. Recently, I conducted a live stream in which I solicited questions from the comic book community on Instagram and then responded to those questions during a live stream on YouTube. And one of the questions came in that had me thinking after the live stream wrapped up. And I realized that potentially I could have given this person a much more robust response than the one that I gave them on the fly during the live stream. So because of this reflection of the live stream, I decided to create this video in which I spend some time talking about some practical tips and pointers for making the hobby work when you're on a budget. Because again, this was a legitimate question that this person asked. How do you make the hobby work for you when you have some budgetary constraints? Now, some of you out there may be thinking that you don't have budgetary constraints, which I completely get, but we all like a good deal, right? We like that. So potentially there is something that I'll say in this video that will help even you. Stay tuned. Reggie here, and I want to welcome you to another one of my videos. As you heard me mention in that brief intro, we are going to talk about some ways to make the hobby work for people that may have budgets and maybe tight budgets that put a little bit of pressure on them being able to get some of the books that they want. And so my hope is that I'll offer up some practical tips and pointers over the course of this video. But as you know, I can't think of everything. So should you have some additional tips and pointers, don't be shy about leaving those down in the comments section. With that said, the very first tip that I want to offer up is that you have to be willing to let things go. Sometimes as a comic book collector, we like to hold on to things. We don't want to sell things off. And because of that, we struggle with actually making the hobby work, because to make the hobby work, you have to find a way to let go of some things to be able to bring some cash in to be able to buy some other things. But if you can never let go, that whole thing just falls apart. So you have to be willing to let some things go. But to that point, one way to potentially wrap your mind around this is to have separate collections. To have a personal collection, books that you don't want to let go, books that have some meaning to you, books that you want in your collection long term. Set those books to the side. Have some other bins, have some other books that you're not necessarily attached to, that if the price is right or if the situation is right, you're willing to let go of those books. And I think if you're able to separate your collection into these two categories of PC, non-PC, then you're going to be less emotionally attached to the non-PC books, and it makes it maybe a little bit easier to let go of those comics. Now, here's the thing. If you're unable to let go of some actual comics, then this is going to be a little bit of a challenge, right? There's potentially some other ways that you can make the hobby work, but selling books is a great way to make the hobby actually work for you. The second tip that I want to offer up is that you potentially will have to give up the notion of timing the market perfectly. One of the things that we like to do is to try to get out at the very moment that book has reached its peak in value. And it's at that moment that you want to be able to unload it so that you don't have any regret. You don't have any regret with having that book be sold here and then it increases in value and you recognize that you could have made a couple of extra bucks. It's impossible. It's impossible to time the market, right? And so you have to be willing, going back to tip one, to be ready and willing to let go of some things, but you also have to be okay with somebody else being able to make a couple of bucks on a book after you sell it. The reality oftentimes is that if you sell a book and it goes up in value, the delta between where you sold it and where you could have sold it is not actually material money in a lot of cases. And especially if you're on a budget and you're dealing with books that may be lower in value, a book going from $20 to $25 that $5 is not that material. Now, if it goes from, $20 to $2,000, that's a whole nother story. But more than likely, you're probably not going to be selling those types of books, but I could be wrong. But again, you have to be okay with letting it go. You have to be okay with not timing the market perfectly every single time, because the reality is that you're probably not going to be able to do it. The third tip, sweat equity is where you are going to make your money. If you are on a budget and you're trying to make the hobby work, you are going to have to put in some extra work. You're going to have to do what potentially other people aren't willing to do. And part of that means that you might have to spend a considerable amount of time digging through long boxes in, antique stores or yard sales, or in comic shops that have massive, back issue inventory. You may have to spend time digging through long boxes at a con to identify those books that may be undervalued, that may have gone up in value, but are still marked at, $1, $2, $5, whatever it happens to be. You're going to have to invest more time in exchange for the fact that you don't have more money to spend, right? And the reality is that if you are trying to make the hobby work and you're only going to eBay, it's probably not going to work. You're going to have to go where other people aren't. You're potentially going to have to do things that other people aren't doing in order to find some real opportunities. It is super easy to sit at home and search eBay and find those deals, find those books that have an auction that ends at 3 a.m. in the morning, right? Those opportunities are out there, but rest assured that there are people out there that are extremely skilled at doing what I just described. So you may have to get off of eBay. You may have to go maybe to some auction sites that are not as well known, maybe some antique stores, maybe some estate sales, maybe physical on-site estate sales is the way to go. Antique stores, go where people aren't actually going, because potentially that is where the opportunity might be for you. The other thing that you have to think about is buying comics in bulk, buying collections. Spending money to get a lot of books at a low cost per book for the opportunity to make a couple of bucks per book that over time adds up to something. You're going to have to, again, spend a little bit more time digging and working to make it all make sense and work for you. The next tip that I want to offer is to make sure that you have a plan for the money that you're going to be raising. If you're going to be selling books off, you don't want the money that has been raised to get through your fingers, because we have an ability as collectors, investors, speculators, whatever you want to call yourself, we have an ability to spend money. And so if you don't have a plan for selling this to buy that, what's going to happen is when you sell this, that will just get away from you, because you're going to spend a little here, a little there, and before you know it, you have nothing to show for it. So you want to make sure that if you're going to roll the money from one thing or a couple of things into something else, you want to know what that something else is before you start to sell things off. The last and final tip that I will offer up is to make sure that you have separate accounts. If you are trying to make the hobby work for you, what you don't want to do is to sell off some comics or whatever it is that you're doing, and you sell those things off, and then that money is commingled with other household money, right? If the money is in the account, the money is going to be spent. And so you don't want to commingle funds, because to my earlier point, those funds will get away from you. But if you have a separate account, and there's lots of ways to actually do this. If you have a separate account, you can sell books, you can take those proceeds, put them into a dedicated account that is solely for the purpose of comics and collectibles and investment, right? That is a great way to isolate those funds, to protect them just a little bit so that you can spend them where and when you need to. And I have videos here on the channel that go through a lot more of how I separate the funds in my personal life for that of my comic book hobby. And so I definitely want to encourage you to check those videos out. So again, I've only begun to scratch the surface with these last few tips. There are a lot of other ways that you can make the hobby work. And again, if you out there watching and you have some tips and pointers for others, I encourage you to leave those thoughts behind, because we can all continue learning from one another, because again, none of us has all the answers. But to that point, should you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. I am not too hard to find if you need me. And if you haven't, for some reason or another, subscribe to the channel, I want to encourage you to go ahead and tap that button right now. Turn on notifications, and that way you won't miss out on any of the content that comes out from the channel. Good luck.